Hello, welcome to Pondering the Orb. I'm Jay Reckward, the Wandering Fantasy Author, and this is my show about riffs, synths, and fantasy books. So subscribe, and let's start the adventure. I wanted to read some Fafhrd The Gray Mouser because I love these stories. They're some of the best stories in the canon of sword and sorcery and adventure fantasy. Leiber, up to the very moment you hear this, is still too underappreciated in the fantasy community. Reading from In the Witch's Tent, released in 1968, this is Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser by Fritz Leiber. In the Witch's Tent by Fritz Leiber. The hag bent over the brazier. Its upward-seeking gray fumes interwove with strands of her downward-dangling, tangled black hair. Its glow showed her face to be as dark, jagged-featured, and dirty as the new-dug root clump of a black apple tree. A half-century of brazier heat and smoke had cured it as black, crinkly, and hard as mingle bacon. Through her splayed nostrils and a slack mouth, which showed a few brown teeth like old tree stumps irregularly fencing the gray field of her tongue, she garglingly inhaled and bubblingly expelled the fumes. Such of them as escaped her greedy lungs tortuously found their way to the tent's saggy roof, resting on 7 rims down-curving from the central pole, and deposited on the ancient rawhide their tiny dole of resin and soot. It is said that such a tent, boiled out after decades or preferably centuries of use, yields a nauseous liquid which gives a man a strange and dangerous visions. It is said such a tent, boiled out after decades or preferably centuries of use, yields a nauseous liquid which gives a man strange and dangerous visions. Outside the tent's drooping walls radiated the dark, twisting alleys of Illichving, an overgrown and rudely boisterous town, which is the 8th and smallest metropolis of the land of the 8 cities. While overhead there shivered in the chill wind the strange stars of the world of Nehwon, which is so like and unlike our own world. Inside the tent, 2 barbarian-clad men watched the crouching witch across the brazier. The big man, who had red-blonde hair, stared somber-eyed and intently. The little man, who was dressed all in gray, drooped his eyelids, stifled a yawn, and wrinkled his nose. "I don't know which stinks worse, her or the brazier," he murmured. "Or maybe it's the whole tent, or this alley muck we must sit in. Or perchance her familiar is a skunk. Look, Fafhrd, if we must consult a sorcerer's personage, we should have sought out Shelba or Ningabel before we ever sailed north of Lankmere across the inner sea." "They weren't available," the big man answered in a clipped whisper. "Shh, Gray Mouser. I think she's gone into trance." "Asleep, you mean," the little man retorted irreverently. The hag's gargling breath began to sound more like a death rattle. Her eyelids fluttered, showing 2 white lines. Wind stirred the tent's dark wall, or it might be unseen presences fumbling and fingering. The little man was unimpressed. He said, "I don't see why we have to consult anyone. It isn't as if we are going outside Nehwon altogether, as we did our last adventure. We've got the papers, the scrap of ramskin parchment, I mean, and we know where we're going. Or at least you say you do." "Shh," the big man commanded, then added hoarsely, "Before embarking on any great enterprise, it is customary to consult a warlock or witch." The little man, now whispering likewise, countered with, "Then why haven't we consulted a civilized one? Any member in good standing of the Lankmere Sorcerers Guild. He'd at least have a comely naked girl or 2 around, to rest your eyes on when they began to water from scanning his crabbed hieroglyphs and horoscopes. A good earthy witch is more honest than some city rogue tricked out in black cone hat and robe of stars," the big man argued. "Besides, this one is nearer our icy goal and its influences. You're in your townsman's lust for luxuries. You turn a wizard's workroom into a brothel." "Why not?" the little man wanted to know. "Both species of glamour at once." Then, jerking his thumb at the hag, "Earthy, you said? Dungy describes her presence better." "Shh, Mouser, you'll break her trance." "Trance?" The little man re-inspected the hag. Her mouth had shut, and she was breathing wheezingly through her beaky nose alone. the fume-sooty tip of which sought to meet her jutting chin. There was a faint, high wailing, as of distant wolves or nearby ghosts, or perhaps just an odd overtone of the hag's wheezes. The little man sneered his upper lip and shook his head. His hands shook a little too, but he hid that. "No, she's only stoned out of her skull, I'd say," he commented judiciously. "You shouldn't have given her so much poppy gum." "But that's the intent of trance," the big man protested. "To lash stone and otherwise drive the spirit out of the skull and whip it up mystic mountains, so that from their peaks it can spy out the lands of past and future, and mayhaps other world." "I wish the mountains ahead of us were merely mystic," the little man muttered. "Look, Fafhrd, I'm willing to squat here all night. At any rate, for 50 more stinking breaths or 200 bored heartbeats, to pleasure your whim. But has it occurred to you that we're in danger in this tent? And I don't mean solely from spirits. There are other rogues than ourselves in Illic Ving, some perhaps on the same quest as ours, who deeply love to scupper us. And here in this blind leather hut we're deer on a skyline. We're sitting ducks." Just then the wind came back with its fumblings and fingerings, and an addition of scrabbling that may have been that of wing-swayed branch tips, or a dead man's long fingernails a scratch. There were faint growlings and wailings too, and with them stealthy footfalls. Both men thought of the Mouser's last warning. Fafhrd and he looked towards the tent's night-slitted skin door and loosened their swords in their scabbards. At that instant the hag's noisy breath stopped, and with it all other sound. Her eyes opened, showing only whites, milky ovals infinitely eerie in the dark root tangle of her sharp features and stringy hair. The gray tip of her tongue traveled like a large maggot around her lips. The Mouser made no comment, but the outthrust palm side of Fafhrd's spread-fingered hand was more compelling than any and a voice low but remarkably clear, almost a girl's voice, the hag intoned. "For reasons sorcerous and dim, you traveled towards the world's frost rim." Dim is the key word here, Mouser thought. Typical witchy say-nothing. She clearly knows not about us, except we're headed north, which she could get from any gossipy mouth. "You north, north, and north must go, through dagger ice and powdered snow." More of the same was the Mouser's inward comment. But must she rub it in, even in the snow? Brr. "And many a rival envy-eyed will dog your steps until you've died." Aha! The inevitable fright thrust, without which no fortune tale is complete. "But after peril's cleansing fire, you'll meet at last your heart's desire. And now pat the happy ending. Gods, but the stupidest palm-reading prostitute of Ephemera could... And then you'll find..." Something silvery gray flashed across Mouser's eyes, so close its form was blurred. Without a second thought, he ducked back and drew scalpel. The razor-shaped spear blade, driven through the tent's side as if it were paper, stopped inches from Fafhrd's head and was dragged back. A javelin hurtled out of the hide wall. This the Mouser struck aside with his sword. Now a storm of cries rose outside. The burden of some was "Death to the strangers!" Of others, "Come out, dogs, and be killed!" The Mouser faced the skin door, his gaze darting. Fafhrd, almost as quick to react as the Mouser, hit on a somewhat irregular solution to their knotty tactical problem, that of men besieged in a fortress whose walls neither protect nor permit outward viewing. At first step, he lead to the tent's central pole, and with a great heave drew it from the earth. The witch, likewise reacting with good solid sense, threw herself flat on the dirt. "We decamp!" Fafhrd cried. "Mouser, guard our front and guide me!" And with that he charged toward the door, carrying the whole tent with him. There was a rapid series of little explosions as the somewhat brittle old thongs that tied its rawhide sides to its pegs snapped. The brazier tumbled over, scattering coals. The hag was overpassed. The Mouser, running ahead of Fafhrd, threw wide the door slit. He had to use scalpel at once, to parry a sword thrust out of the dark, but with his other hand he kept the door spread. The opposing swordsman was bowled over, perhaps a bit startled at being attacked by a tent. The Mouser trod on him. He thought he heard ribs snap as Fafhrd did the same, which seemed a nice if brutal touch. Then he was crying out, "Veer left now, Fafhrd. Now to the right a little. There's an alley coming up on our left. Be ready to turn sharp into it when I give the word. Now!" Grasping the door's hide edges, the Mouser helped swing the tent as Fafhrd pivoted. From behind came cries of rage and wonder, and also screeching that sounded like the hag, enraged at the theft of her home. The alley was so narrow that the tent sides dragged against the buildings and fences. At the first sign of a soft spot in the dirt underfoot, Fafhrd drove the tent pole into it, and they both dashed out of the tent, leaving it blocking the alley. The cries behind them grew suddenly louder as their pursuers turned into the alley, but Fafhrd and Mouser did not run over swiftly. It seemed certain their attackers would spend considerable time scouting and insulting the empty tent. They lopped together through the outskirts of the sleeping city, toward their own well-hidden camp outside of it. Their nostrils sucked in the chill, bracing air funneling down from the best pass through the Troll Steppe Mountains, a craggy chain which walled off the land of the 8 cities from the vast plateau of the cold wastes to the north. Fafhrd remarked, "It's unfortunate the old lady was interrupted when she was about to tell us something important." Mouser snorted. She'd already sung her song, the sum of which was 0. "I wonder who those rude fellows were, and what were their motives," Fafhrd asked. "I thought I recognized the voice of the Elswiller Narfi, who has an aversion to bear meat." "Scoundrels behaving as stupidly as we were," the Mouser answered. "Motives? As soon input them to sheep. 10 dolts following an idiot leader. Still, it appears that someone doesn't like us," Fafhrd opined. "Was that ever news?" the Gray Mouser retorted. When Lohit emerges from the river, devoid of the memories of his dark past, only one urge draws him forth: to a pale sword forged from the bones of the world. Tim Akers brings us Servant of a Pale Sword, a really fun novella and the first entry in the Bladecasters of Ephemera series. If you like dark heroes, tricky rogues, and a magic system that makes sense in a great sword and sorcery setting, go and pick this up. Reading from Servant of a Pale Sword, released in 2023. This is by Tim Akers. Servant of a Pale Sword, by Tim Akers. Bladecaster Ephemera, Book 1. When you go to the Temple of Absolution, you take a memory and a stone. The stone comes from the cold waters of the river at the base of the mountain, chosen by the supplicant in accordance with tradition and the weight of their heart. The memory is born of pain, of loss, of suffering. You carry both of these things up the winding mountain path that leads to the temple. When you leave, both are gone, and only a shadow remains in your heart. The pilgrim stood in the waters that flowed from the mountain, knee-deep and numb, feeling his way through the riverbed, trying to make his selection, trying to find a stone capable of holding the memory gnawing at his soul. Blunt fingers played over smooth stone, discarding each until he couldn't feel his hands, keeping at it as the freezing waters of the river soaked through the wolf-spun wool of his penitent's robes. Other pilgrims came and left, making their selections quick or slow, casting a glance at the shivering form of the man in the middle of the river, before turning to the weather-wooden archway that marked the foot of the temple's path. Finally he stood, hefting a stone as large as his head, slick with moss and sediment. Struggling under its weight, the pilgrim lurched to shore on numb legs. He set the burden down long enough to squeeze the river from his robes. Cold wind cut through his flesh, setting him to shivering like a newborn colt. The path ahead was long, but his back was strong, and the muscles in his arms rippled as he lifted the gray rock once again. The stone was heavy and slick. He hugged it to his chest with both arms to keep it from slipping free. The rough surface tore at his wrist, smearing blood across the moss. The cold wind leaked into his bones, even as his arms and back burned with the effort of carrying it up the mountain path. Feeling slowly returned to his legs, only to be replaced with excruciating pain. The path was narrow and snarled, with roots of the trees that clung stubbornly to the crumbling face of the mountain. Other pilgrims passed him, in groups of 3 or 4, their conversations falling silent as they overtook the man and his burden. They carried lighter stones, some no larger than the palm of a hand, fished out of the shallows of the river before the water's chill could do its worst. The pilgrim wondered what kind of memory such stones could bear, and why anyone would bother having them removed. Memories made us. Sometimes they destroy us. He pressed his face against his burden and struggled on. His path switched back and forth, steep stairs cut into the mountainside by ancient hands. Sometimes the steps disappeared entirely, melting into the mountain from generations of erosion and traffic. There were other roads to the temple, clean-cut and wide, built for horses and later wagons. There was a long road somewhere at the top as well, offering instantaneous travel for those with the power to open the gate, or the gold to have it done for them. But those were not the way of the pilgrim. For those coming to the temple to be relieved of their burdens, there was only the path, and the stone, and the memory. The temple floated in the middle of a deep mountain lake, set between ridgelines and punctured by rocky spires, the still surface of its waters as dark as wine. Strings of paper lanterns hung from the dark wood of the temple railings, casting stars across the water, swaying gently. A simple raft carried the pilgrim and his stone to the temple's gate. He was greeted by a masked priest who led him to one of the prayer chambers that surrounded the open pool at the temple's heart. There he meditated on the memory, running his mind across the wound that brought him to the lake, and this ritual. A final embrace of the pain. When he was ready, he signaled to the attendant priest and his whispering knife. And then the priest cut the memory from the pilgrim's soul. Of this the pilgrim remembered little. The priest asked no questions. He took the stone from the pilgrim's bruised and bleeding hands, setting it on a plinth in the middle of the chamber, then drew a short dagger. The knife's blade was forged from materia, the very bones of the world, milky white and translucent. The dagger moved like a darting fish in the priest's knotted hands, droning as it gathered anima from the air, mixing with the smoke from the censers. Sparks dashed in its wake, as though the air had become flint. As the pilgrim's memory unraveled, the priest cut runes into the stone, the crystalline blade slicing into the rock like it was clay. The air hissed and grew hot. A final cut, and the breath in the pilgrim's lungs froze, his blood frost, his mind empty. Fat motes of light drifted to the floor like burning snow. The priest stepped aside and gestured to the pool. The pilgrim hefted the stone one last time. His fingers played over the runes cut seamlessly into the surface. There was something familiar about them. They reminded him of... The memory slipped. He walked to the pool, setting the stone on the lip before pushing it into the waters. It disappeared with a muted splash, swallowed by the darkness as soon as it left his hands. The memory went with it, dropping silently beneath the surface. Only the ripples remained, in a void where it had been lodged in the pilgrim's head. The pilgrim left without a word, emptier than he had been, lighter. Deep below, a field of black hands plucked the stone from the water as it fell. They passed it back and forth, hand to hand, their blunt fingers tracing the runes, tasting their pain, savoring their weight. Among sightless eyes, they slithered, consumed, and remembered.
How do I say this? In the same calendar year, we get a new Dark Tranquillity record. Wintersun's long-awaited follow-up, Time 2. Battlesword comes through with a fifth album that is pure melodic death metal excitement. Harkening back to the best days of Sweden, but pressing forth with a wicked sense of now, Germany's Battlesword returns with a stunning collection of great songs. Playing Break the Seven Seals from the upcoming album 25, Tales and Tragedies out of MDD Records this September 2024, this is Battlesword.
Your religion is written in such a
It is with great honor and joy I introduce Pondering the Orb to a composer who constantly catches my attention. I listen to a lot of synthwave, as you can imagine, and every time he is featured, I stop to listen because this music is so damned good. Brought to us by the Parisian superstar, I'm excited to play for you 2024's release by the incomparable Adu Aru. Next episode is a season 3 finale, and we're going to go big. See you then, and safe journeys.